The Where Our Minds Wander podcast may contain sensitive content and explicit language. Listener discretion is advised. Greetings, fellow wanderers, to the places our minds wander.
The house at the end of the dirt road, where disembodied voices whisper and strange sounds make the living shiver.
Where shadows lurk at the edge of the woods, just outside your back door. And mysterious lights speed beyond reason across the clear night sky.
Odd events throughout time that lead you down the rabbit hole.
I'm Wes.
And I'm Beth.
And this is Where Our Minds Wander. Hello and welcome to Where Our Minds Wander, all you fellow wanderers. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, everybody.
Well, before we get into tonight's story, Beth is pretty excited to share an update with us.
I love it when there's always new pieces to the puzzle, and this one's pretty cool. So, back in episode 42, I had talked about the lost colony of Roanoke, and how we still don't really know where the 118 colonists disappeared to. Well, recently, two archaeologists named Mark Horton and Scott Dawson were doing some archaeological work on Hatteras, which is the current name of the island that the Croatoans used to live on. And one of the theories was that the colonists had made their way to Hatteras and had assimilated, but there wasn't a lot of evidence for that. Well, these two archaeologists just uncovered bucket loads of hammer scale, which is little tiny forged pieces of metal. And not only does this hammer scale date to the time of the colonists of Roanoke, but the Croatoans didn't have the knowledge at the time of how to forge metal. So they're saying it's evidence that the colonists actually did make it to Hatteras, and they did assimilate with the natives.
It's pretty cool that they're still working on it, and we're getting closer and closer to possibly an answer.
It's really cool.
Tonight, we're sharing a topic that's pretty close to us because we can actually see it from our house.
We can. 365 days a year, unless it's cloudy.
Right.
Or snowing.
We just look across the lake and there's Vermont.
Yep. So do you want me to get started?
Yeah, get right into it. I'm excited about this episode.
Okay, so when I was a kid, my family owned a summer camp in Rouse's Point, New York, which is right on Lake Champlain. And Lake Champlain borders northern New York, Vermont, and Canada. So for years, both my mom's family and my dad's family would get together for a few weeks in the summer to just hang out and eat food and just catch up. And one summer, my uncle shared a pretty hair-raising story about him witnessing what he swore was a UFO crash in Massachusetts. And I was probably 8 or 9 years old at the time, and I knew the story was for adult ears, but of course, I caught some snippets, and what I heard was more than enough to freak me out. But I kept reassuring myself that UFOs weren't going to come anywhere near to me because Lake Champlain was nowhere near Massachusetts. But maybe I wouldn't have felt so reassured if I knew the truth that there have been plenty of reported UFO sightings in Vermont. Almost 600 of them, to be exact, reaching all the way back to 1907. And some of them were right on the shores of Lake Champlain.
I know, and that's what fascinates me. 1907. We didn't have anything in the sky at that time.
Not all over, no. I mean,
No.
in little pockets of places, maybe. But yeah. So, according to 7daysvermont.com, on the evening of July 2nd, 1907, 3 prominent men of Burlington, Vermont, former Governor Urban Woodbury, Roman Catholic Bishop John S. Michaud, and shipping magnate A.A. Buell, had just finished dinner at a Burlington restaurant. As the 3 men stood on the corner of Church Street and College Street, deep in conversation, they were completely startled by a massive explosion somewhere over their heads. They each told the Burlington Free Press that when they looked up to see what the heck had exploded, because, like Wes said, it was 1907, long before airplanes were a common sight, they saw a torpedo-shaped craft hovering about 300 feet above them. Bishop Michaud described the UFO as, quote, 6 feet long by 8 inches in diameter. The shell or covering having a dark appearance with here and there tongues of fire issuing from spots on the surface, resembling red-hot burnished copper, end quote. The men watched in total awe as it slowly flew onward, disappearing beyond their view past Dolan Brothers' store on College Street. But other witnesses claimed the UFO actually flew right into an unsuspecting horse, leaving it stunned before continuing on its way. Now, there wasn't any information on whether or not the horse recovered from this experience.
Well, at first I thought, okay, it's a meteorite. But it continued on. It was not a meteorite.
And it sounds like a missile.
That it does.
So it is one heck of a UFO sighting, especially since it was so early in the century. And as far as what it could have been, airplanes weren't used by the military until 1914, and they certainly weren't cigar-shaped. The U.S. Army did have dirigibles in 1907, but the smallest one was 185 feet long. It didn't fly much higher than 200 feet. So it's really not likely that it was a dirigible and that all 3 men were just wrong about how high up in the sky it was. Plus, if a 185-foot-long dirigible rammed into a horse, I think it would do more than just stun the poor animal.
Or even if something came out of the dirigible and fell to earth, it's not going to be on fire. It's not going to catch that much speed coming down that it would burst into flames.
And it would come straight down. It wouldn't fly.
Right.
Horizontally. So 40 years later, in June of 1947, Kenneth Arnold had his famous UFO sighting over Mount Rainier. And 13 days later, on July 7th, Mrs. Albert Steele of Rutland, Vermont, had her own UFO sighting. Now, it is possible that Mrs. Steele heard about Arnold's sighting on the radio, but her sighting was vastly different from his. It was 2:05 a.m., and it was raining outside when Mrs. Steele happened to look out her bedroom window. Hovering over the Central Vermont Public Service Corporation building was a shiny oval with jagged, multicolored edges. Now, just to compare, Kenneth Arnold had seen 9 separate and distinct metallic objects in a line formation during the daytime. 1958 was a very popular year for Vermont UFO sightings. According to the National UFO Reporting Center, or NUFORC's database, on April 17th, 300 witnesses across the United States saw an oval-shaped object covered in rotating, colored lights in a span of just 90 minutes. It made its way towards Plattsburgh, New York's Air Force Base before heading towards Winooski, Vermont. One witness in Winooski actually saw the craft hover about half a mile from their house before it briefly landed. Then the craft took off at about 60 miles per hour. The Winooski police received so many calls that they sent out patrol cars, and the local fire station responded, thinking there was a crashed aircraft. That same year, in East Fairfield, which is about 36 miles away from Winooski, witnesses, including police officers, reported a triangular craft with red and blue lights. This craft flew pretty close to a missile launch site, then around people's homes. Farmer Lemond Bovitt said it traveled over the woods near his farm before heading off towards the mountains. It seems like every decade just brought more and more strange sightings. And in the case of the 1961 North Concord radar station sighting, it involved one heck of a weird coincidence. The North Concord radar station in East Haven, Vermont, sits on the 3,438-foot-tall East Mountain. It opened in 1956, during the Cold War, and its main purpose was to provide early warning signs of any nuclear activity and to report information to the Strategic Air Command bases. It was manned by the 911th Aircraft Control and Warning Squadron. In 1961, the 175 men who worked there could enjoy a gym, a store, a bowling alley, and a barber shop up on the mountain. But it was still pretty remote, and the harsh winters made it rather treacherous. In 1961, an unidentified object showed up on their radar. They tracked this UFO for a full 18 minutes before it disappeared. And just hours later, Betty and Barney Hill, the most famous of all alien abductees, were taken from Route 3 near Lancaster, New Hampshire, which is just 24 miles away from East Haven, Vermont.
Isn't that unbelievable?
That is a weird coincidence. The base was renamed the Lyndonville Air Force Station in 1962, and it was abandoned by the military in 1963, before construction of it was even fully completed. After years of vandalism and even a gruesome accidental decapitation, the abandoned site was put on the Vermont Hazardous Sites list in 2013. The surrounding soil is contaminated by arsenic, lead, and chromium. According to Newfork, 3 years after the radar station sighting, a gentleman reported that on August 20th, 1964, he was at home in Walden, Vermont, with his mother, brother, and his mother's roommate. The house sat relatively close to a railroad trestle, and it was bordered by a dirt road. Their nearest neighbor was an elderly lady. On that particular evening, the witness, who was just a child at the time, was walking down the road by himself when he noticed a large, cigar-shaped craft pacing him above the field next to the road. He said it was very large but silent. The next thing he knew, he was being woken up by his mother, who had been looking for him for several hours. She had found him in the family's barn, laying down in the hay. He had no idea how he got to the barn at all, but he didn't tell her what he had seen. 1965 was just as active as the previous years. For example, 25 people claimed to see a UFO over Burlington's South End, according to 7daysvermont.com. On January 4th, 1965, Dr. Woodruff, who was on the faculty at the University of Vermont and the chief medical examiner, was driving down Route 12 with a state trooper towards Burlington. All of a sudden, a glowing red-orange object came flying from behind the tree line and flew across the road in front of them at an incredible speed. The trooper exclaimed, quote, "My God, did you see that?" But before Dr. Woodruff could respond, 2 more objects came whizzing across the sky. They actually joined the first, and the 3 of them took off in formation. Dr. Woodruff was so awestruck by what they'd seen that he contacted the Burlington Free Press and the head of the state's Civil Aeronautics Board, Edward Knapp. The government claimed that the 3 objects were nothing more than meteors, which Dr. Woodruff openly scoffed at. He thought the idea that he'd confuse meteors with what he saw was preposterous.
That is pretty insulting to your intelligence.
Yes, meteors, travel in 3s in perfect formation.
Right. Now, I would have said it could be something from Plattsburgh Air Force Base because we were a SAC base and we had jet fighters. But no, there's no way it was that.
I know. One of the more unique sightings occurred in 1967 at the Buff Ledge Summer Camp in Colchester, Vermont, which is very close by to us, because it involved claims of actual abduction. The camp, by the way, is right on the shore of Lake Champlain. According to astronomer Walter N. Webb in his 1993 book, Encounter at Buff Ledge, a UFO Case History, one August day, the swim team was at a meet in Burlington, and the camp was basically empty, except for 16-year-old maintenance worker Michael Lapp and one of the water skiing instructors, 19-year-old Janet Cornell. The sun was about to set, so the 2 teenagers decided to sit on the end of the boat dock and enjoy it. At one point, Lapp thought they had a pretty good view of Venus in the sky, too, until the bright light began to get bigger. Then it appeared to get lower and lower in the sky until it wasn't a far-off planet at all, but some sort of craft. Then 3 smaller lights seemed to drop out of the bottom of the bigger UFO, and those 3 headed across the lake straight towards Lapp and Cornell.
So another 3.
Uh-huh. Lots of 3s, and cigar shapes for some reason. The 3 craft did all kinds of crazy maneuvers, like zigzags and loops. Then all 3 of them seemed to fall out of the sky, quote, like falling leaves, before rejoining in a triangle formation. 2 of the 3 craft took off, but the 3rd tilted to one side and dropped below the surface of the water. When it reemerged, it glided straight towards the 2 teenagers, emitting a sound like, quote, 1,000 tuning forks. The craft was also close enough now for Lapp to see a glass dome on the top and 2 classic gray aliens staring down at them. As the UFO moved directly over top of the 2 kids, a beam of light shot down on them, and it was so bright that Lapp later said it was like an X-ray because he could actually see the bones inside his own hand. He was able to scream, quote, "We don't want to go." But the next thing he remembered was looking up at the sky from the dock. He was lying on his back, and the sky was pitch black. Beside him, Janet Cornell was disoriented and half asleep. Within minutes, the swim team was getting out of the van and returning to camp. Neither Lapp nor Cornell said a word to any of them about what had happened, although years later, at least 2 of the swim team members claimed that they had noticed a weird light over the dock right before they pulled into camp. Lapp suffered from horrible nightmares for years afterwards, and in 1977, he decided to contact the Center for UFO Studies to see if they could help him. It was through them that Walter Webb got to know Lapp. Both Lapp and Cornell eventually agreed to undergo hypnosis, and they revealed some important details about their abduction. The Greys, who all looked exactly alike, seemed much more interested in Cornell. They shined lights into her eyes, scraped her skin with metal instruments, and took various fluids from her body. She later confirmed that she felt cold during the examination and that she could feel them pulling her hair. Lapp remembered that the Greys only had 3 fingers on each hand, and their skin felt, quote, damp and clammy. They also communicated with him telepathically that their goal was to create a race just like humans on other planets. Now, whether you believe in hypnosis or not, their story is definitely interesting.
It really is. But why would you want to create a race like us? Especially, since you would imagine they're observing us and they see what we do. Perhaps they'd like to create the image of us, but not like us.
And what's to say that humans could survive on other planets anyway? It would have to be a planet just like Earth, or very, very, very similar, in order for humans to survive there.
Right.
Well, it's just weird, But there's so many encounter stories. Like I said, there's close to 600 of them. And the more we read, the more we kept saying, did you see this one? No, did you see this one? So we're going to tell you what else we found right after this quick break. Hey, did you know? In 1559, the Spanish ship, the Emmanuel Point II, sank near what's now Pensacola Bay, Florida. It was one of Conquistador Tristan de Luna y Arellano's 11 ships, carrying colonists, soldiers, enslaved people, Aztec Indians, and 2 domesticated cats. Scientists know the 2 cats were domesticated because recent analysis of their remains showed carbon isotopes of both fish and various meats, likely given to them by the sailors. They may have initially been just mousers, but by the time of the wreck, they were well-loved pets, making them the first known domesticated cats to arrive in North America. Who'da thunk it?
All right, we're back, and I'm going to pick up where Beth left off around 1975. A report was submitted to Newfork by a man who shared a sighting that his grandfather had between Montpelier and Burlington in the fall of 1975. His grandfather was an officer with Montpelier law enforcement, and on this particular evening, he was driving on Interstate 89 just after dark. As he drove, he noticed what he thought was a construction site all lit up on the side of a mountain. Even though Montpelier is a capital city, it's relatively small, and his grandfather felt like he should have known if a construction project was happening. Since it was on a mountain, he assumed it was a new ski resort going up, but it was awfully bright and covered in bright lights. He pulled over along with several other motorists, and the group stood and talked about what they were looking at. They couldn't hear any construction noises whatsoever. Eventually, the grandfather took note of the mile marker and got back in his car and drove away. The following day, he stopped at the exact same spot, thinking he'd have a much better view of the construction site in the daylight. But to his shock, there wasn't even a mountain to look at. It was just open fields. And all he could think was that they had witnessed a massive UFO that had landed in the field off in the distance, and they had all tried to rationalize what they were looking at the night before. 1980 brought yet another incredible UFO sighting. This one took place at the Burlington International Airport. According to a UFO research newsletter published in 1980, several witnesses saw something weird for an entire hour on March 22nd. It happened between 10 and 11 p.m. Police officers reported seeing strange lights. So did amateur astronomers, and 2 air traffic controllers saw something too. It was so unusual that they even spoke to the Burlington Free Press about their experience. Air traffic controller Donald Kernan said, quote, "The lights I saw were not like anything I had ever seen before. It was a bright light that really played. It did a kind of dance." End quote. Fellow air traffic controller Richard Morris said that whatever the crafts were, they showed up on the radar. They traveled 4 miles in 2 sweeps on the screen, which indicated that they were traveling 1,500 miles per hour, which was 2 to 3 times faster than a Boeing 747. Morris said that they were moving west, just north of Juniper Island, and in addition to the awesome speed, the 4 objects behaved oddly. At first, the radar showed 3 small blips, but then these blips all joined a larger, even brighter anomaly. Then, they broke into 4 separate blips again. He tracked them for about a mile before they simply vanished off the radar. Both men confirmed that there were no known aircraft in the area at the time, at least none that were scheduled, and the tracings were much too fast to be any sort of bird. Hundreds of sightings continued to be reported to Newfork each year throughout the 1990s and 2000s. In fact, they're still coming in, with the most recent sighting being just last month. Now, Beth and I both spent a while combing through dozens of them, because they're pretty interesting to read. But to be fair, some of the accounts do seem explainable, especially in a few cases when witnesses were able to catch photographs. It seems to me that they were just shooting stars or chemtrails.
Yeah, you know how sometimes when you see an airplane leaving like a trail in the sky during the day and it's at that certain angle that it looks like it's going straight up and down? Have you ever seen that?
Yeah, many times. I grew up with the Air Force Base here.
Right. So there was one report that included photographs that to me looked like that. But I also appreciated it because it gives everybody the opportunity to try and rationalize what the person may have been seeing. Or in some of the other cases of the photographs, you could look at it and go, yeah, that's really weird. I don't know what that is.
Right. And some of the reports ended up being Starlink, which is also cool. Because like you said, it gives people an explanation so that if they see it, they can rule it out as extraterrestrial. And then, if they see something that doesn't look like that, they know that it's truly odd. Like this report submitted on December 26, 2008 in Stowe, Vermont. For those of you who may not have ever heard of Stowe, it's a pretty popular ski resort. The Von Trapp Lodge is in Stowe, the very same Von Trapp family from The Sound of Music. The report was submitted by a maintenance manager at one of the resorts. During the winter, it was part of his job to plow the roads on the property. It was close to Thanksgiving, and family was visiting. It had snowed quite a bit, so the night before Thanksgiving, the witness and a family friend were in his truck, trying to finish up plowing. As they headed down the mountain, the truck just died. No headlights, nothing. They couldn't get it to restart, so they got out and started walking back towards the resort. As they walked, they both saw what they both thought was a large, low-flying plane overhead. It was so low that they could see a dozen windows and what they thought were people looking out. And then they noticed that there was a second craft flying right behind it. The witness wrote that his first thought was that two airplanes were somehow in trouble and that the nearby Stowe Airport wouldn't be able to handle two craft that big. But then they realized that they couldn't see any wings on either aircraft, and they were silent, except that the air had a weird electrical charge all of a sudden. After the craft passed over and flew out of sight, a vehicle came down the road towards them. It was the witness's boss who had come looking for them because they had been gone so long. They told him what had happened, and he drove them back to their truck. When they got there, the headlights were on and the truck started up with no problem.
That's a really classic and yet scary kind of encounter.
It most certainly is. It's one you hear many times over.
And I also think it's weird that that's twice now where witnesses in Vermont have claimed to have seen actual beings looking down from the crafts.
Yeah, that's unusual also because you don't usually hear of beings in the craft looking down upon people or even seeing beings in the craft.
Right. So they were very low and have very clean
view of them.
Shiny windows.
According to 7 Days Vermont, in 2016, a man named Derek Burrows was on a hunting trip with his father in Duxbury, Vermont. It had recently snowed, and as the men stood near their hunting cabin, looking east towards the White Mountains, they saw another hunter come out of the nearby woods. This hunter was gesturing wildly, as if he wanted them to look up. Thinking that there was a bird that the guy wanted to take down, they looked up, and they were startled to see a red light hovering in the sky. They weren't really concerned, though. They figured it was some sort of flare or light beam coming from nearby Sugarbush Resort. So they went inside and had dinner. After dinner, and I assumed talking about what they had seen, they went back outside and looked up. The red light was now directly overhead. It was a steady light, no blinking, no pulsing, and it was getting closer. Then, two more red lights came from over the ridge, and the three of them moved into a triangular formation. Once they were together, they sped off in perfect formation. Since they didn't make any sound, Burrows assumed that they were pretty high up in the sky, too high for conventional aircraft. That same year, Nicole Nelson, who was one half of the Burlington Blues duo, Dwight and Nicole, was with a group of friends waiting out in the lake, hoping to see the lunar eclipse. Burlington is known for being a lakeside city. It has plenty of open lakefront that's accessible to the public. That night, the lake was pretty low due to lack of rain, so they were able to wade out pretty far. They were kind of bummed that it was cloudy, but they had hoped to catch a glimpse of the moon anyway. All of a sudden, they all saw this really strange object come from out of the clouds. Nelson described it as, quote, a cross between an old train and some sort of giant insect, end quote. She didn't have any details about its size or any noise, but she said it swooped down towards them and then veered away and flew off. So that's pretty weird. I mean, you hear about cigar-shaped UFOs and disc-shaped ones and triangles, but a train-insect hybrid is pretty unique.
I'd say. I don't want to see a train-insect hybrid UFO.
Yeah, that's really weird. That is one that I would not want to see at all.
And totally different from anything else that we came across.
I've never heard anything like that in any UFO story.
Mm-mm.
Now, the last Vermont sighting that I want to share is from April 7th of 2024, and it also happened in Stowe. The witnesses were both military personnel, although it doesn't say where they were in Stowe when they saw it, other than that they were looking west out their condo's windows at around 10:15 p.m. They both saw two rotating objects in the sky with white, green, and red flashing lights. The two craft were close enough that they grabbed their binoculars and looked at them. They could clearly see that the objects looked like upside-down bowls and that they were both spinning or rotating. They watched these two rotating craft for a good 15 minutes before the UFOs flew off. Now, this report was interesting to me for two reasons. First, because they were both military personnel, and second, because the witness said in the report that they had seen these crafts before over nearby Hyde Park, Vermont. So, although you don't typically hear Vermont mentioned when it comes to states with high numbers of UFO sightings, it most definitely is. I mean, almost 600 sightings over a span of 65 years is pretty impressive.
And see, I told you that when I was a kid, I should have been more worried.
Oh, yeah, because they were, really looking for young kids to pick up and take off to their mothership, and God knows what they were going to do with you, probe you in bizarre ways.
Look,
Do you know anybody that was ever, abducted by a UFO within your group or friends or family?
No, but...
You got nothing to worry about.
Listen, when you're a kid and you're staying on that lake and it's so dark and you know that Champy the lake monster is already out there.
Oh, yeah.
The last thing you want to worry about is UFOs coming too.
I know. Can you imagine if it would have been an alien riding Champy? That would have really freaked you out.
That would have been awesome. Champy goes down and resurfaces and he's got a UFO balanced on his nose.
Well, maybe they're responsible for Champy. Maybe they pick him up and drop him off at times.
Maybe. Or maybe he's the guard serpent of their underwater base.
Perhaps so. But I think Lake Champlain is only like 600 feet deep. I guess you could have a underwater base there. It's pretty deep.
You never know.
No, it's not like fathoms, but hey.
I think I've mentioned this before because it's an embarrassing story. So I'll tell it again, even if I have mentioned it before.
Oh, you have, and you will.
So, yes. About 15 years ago, I was heading back from Lake Placid, New York with my ex-husband. We were heading back from Lake Placid, and it was around 9 or 10 o'clock at night. And we could see this really weird glow in the sky. And then it turned into like beams of light, and then it would turn back into a glow. And it was very weird, but with the way you're driving through the mountains and through the curving roads, it was impossible to tell if it was coming from the ground up or if it was coming from the sky down. So we decided we were going to try to get closer to it. And as we did, I mean, we're going off the main road and going on these back roads, and we were like, oh my God, it's a UFO. It is coming from the sky. And we were getting kind of excited. And we come around this last bend and we're thinking, we're going to see like this UFO. And it was a high school football game inside their high school field with the lights.
And do you know what's funny about that?
What?
I also remember coming back from Lake Placid and seeing a glow, and it was the football field.
Now, see, if I'd only known you then, you could have told me not to bother taking a hour detour off the main road to go look at a football game.
I would have just kept going that way, and I would have told you it was a UFO and we were going to go meet with the mothership.
Well, anyway, we felt like idiots at the time, but if we hadn't checked it out, I think it would have been one of those stories where I would have been like, and I have no idea what it was, and maybe it was a UFO, but at least now I can say we debunked it, And we know for sure that it was not.
Well, here's the thing. When you're in Lake Placid, you're pretty far up there. And when you're coming down, you can see, and especially if there's a mist or something, or there's a fog in the air with the lights like that, it does look like something's still rather high in the air.
Right.
Until you get upon it and you realize, oh, no, it's nothing.
Right. Well, there you have it, everybody. If you ever find yourself in Vermont, don't forget to look up once in a while, and you might just witness something otherworldly in the night sky and have the honor of joining the ranks of the many other witnesses. And then you could always share your story on New Fork, too.
Or if you like Beth, maybe you'll stumble upon a football game going on.
And then tell thousands of people about it.
All right, that about wraps it up. If you'd like to know more about tonight's episode and do some research for yourself, check out our show notes.
Our show notes? Our show notes?
It's hot in here.
It is hot in here. But like we promised, if you go to the New Fork site, you can read all 500 and however many reports there are just for Vermont. And then you can always click on other states and your own state and see what there is.
Hell, check out Plattsburgh, New York. We're right across the lake. We literally can see them from the house, like we say, and it's not much across. It's like a 10-minute by boat across the water.
Right.
So you would definitely be able to see them here.
Mm-hmm. We got to keep our eyes on the skies, honey.
That we do. Well, with that said, join us again next week for an all-new episode of Where Our Minds Wander.
See you soon. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to traveling with you again to the places where our minds wander.
If you like what you heard, please take a moment and provide us with a 5-star rating and a comment on your favorite listening platform. It really helps us move up the list and become more visible on the podcast charts so new people can find us.
And thank you all for your continued support.
See you next week for an all-new episode.